I was living in Indonesia for a year after going to college teaching English, and I had the chance to visit this remote village called Lamalera, which is a small, maybe 2,000 people village that whose people subsist entirely on the meat of whales, and they're one of a dozen or so so-called Aboriginal whaling societies left in the world. And when I was there, I had a chance to see how much whales could mean to a place and a people. And that got me thinking about the way whales have been involved in human history for generations and centuries, and that's something that really fascinates me. I would say that the best piece of advice I've ever received was from a college buddy of mine. His name's Will. And we were both overachievers, and we were both always exhausting ourselves, doing a lot of work and burning out on things, and we were having trouble figuring out how to balance our lives. And one time he advised me everything in moderation, including moderation. And I think it was a really succinct way of putting it, that you should be balanced but devote yourself and go above and beyond sometimes for things you care about. So I'm kind of ashamed of it. It's a fifth grade science fair. I wanted to observe the behavioral response of my cat to different volumes and frequencies of sound to see which sound she was most sensitive to. So I had to put her in a room, close the door, and just played these tones at different volumes and frequencies, and just kind of wrote down how she reacted. I'm sure it was unpleasant for her. But I think there's a nice coherence to that, because my lab is involved in this study now called the Behavioral Response Study of Cetaceans, and it's investigating the effects of naval sonar on marine mammals. So it's been in my blood since I was a kid. So. I don't think I've found it yet. I think the reason I want to be a researcher is the chance to get good at asking the right question, figuring out how to test it, collecting the data, analyzing it, and packaging it, and communicating it to others. And when you see scientists do that well, it's an amazing thing, and it's a really hard thing to do, and I haven't been able to do that yet. I feel like I'm learning from the right people to do that, so that's what I'm looking forward to. But if I had to say right now, in my experience, my favorite thing, it's not only being outside, because that's what science should be about, is being outside in a lot of ways. But being outside in a really attentive way, where you're really paying attention to what's around you. So research helps me engage with what I'm around when I'm outside. Speaking strictly in terms of the biological sciences, I would say a very sound familiarity with your system. Natural history and knowing it based on experience, having gotten your hands dirty in the project. Often we approach subjects without having a good understanding of all angles of the topic. Just looking at the molecules doesn't tell you anything about the animal per se. Just looking at broad patterns as an ecologist doesn't tell you anything about this one specific system. So really getting your hands dirty and having experience with the system is key, I think. Working with the fin whales up in British Columbia, the benefits are obvious to me. There's a lot of urgent need for baseline data in that area, because there are industrial projects that are threatening to change not only the acoustic habitat there with the noise from tanker traffic, but also the unforeseeable consequences of having so much tanker traffic in that area, from wave action, from possible spills and that sort of thing. So collecting baseline data now provides an opportunity for assessment later. I think the most recent influential researcher I've come across is a professor at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and his name's Paul Dayton. He's known for intertidal ecology and polar ecology. And when I came to a PhD program, I assumed that I would be kind of putting aside very broad questions, any kind of focus on natural history. I thought I would be focusing in on a single topic, on a very single question. And he showed me that not only can you not do that, you have to be always out in your system and becoming familiar with it, but it's the key to PhD quality research, is knowing and having the experience with your subject to speak about it with authority. And you can't get that from reading literature, which helps. You can't get it from just looking at your data. You have to be there for the collection of that data, and you have to be there for the uncollectible things, just watching interactions and things like that. How little we know, or how difficult it is to know anything about whales. It's surprising because they're so huge, and you'd think that it'd be obvious, whatever questions we have about them, the answer would be obvious. And this isn't to discredit whale researchers, but it's to their credit because it actually is so difficult to study cetaceans. They are at the surface maybe 10% of the time, and when they are at the surface, only 10% of their bodies are showing, so they're the kind of biological 1%, and we're just trying to figure out what they're doing. And even the most basic questions like how many are there, or how deep do they go to feed, require inordinate resources to answer. I should probably say my computer, because that's where all the data are, but I would say my bike. I keep my bike in my office, and I got pretty long legs, and they don't make bikes that fit me usually, so it'd be hard to replace it, that's for sure. I would say there's this pianist named George Winston. He describes himself as a folk pianist. It's really relaxing and not distracting. So I listen to that, but when I'm getting tired at the end of the day, or if I'm doing some mind-numbing work, I usually crank up Michael Jackson, and he keeps me awake. So.